Hello, welcome to our next panel, Navigating Climate Anxiety. I want to start by just having a note. Today, we're going to be talking broadly about some pretty heavy and scary themes. I want to encourage everyone through this conversation to be assured that we are doing our best to focus on hope, to focus on action, and to focus on joy. These things are big, they're scary, they're real, but we are doing what we can and doing our best. And that is what these lovely panelists are here to discuss. We're going to do our best to avoid pathologizing climate anxiety. We recognize that the climate crisis is happening. This is climate despair, eco anxiety, however you want to frame it. Those big feelings that a lot of us are feeling are for a reason. It's not something that's just in our head or something that we need to work through on a personal level. This is a real, normal response to the things that we're seeing. As a justified and real threat, our reactions of anger or confusion or sadness, they make sense. And in fact, they are just. But those feelings can at times overpower us. We can forget to take care of ourselves. It can scare us away from action. It could cloud our thinking as we're trying to dream of a more green and healthy future. It can get in the way of building strategies to make that climate change possible. And as a result, I was like, I need to go find some people who are feeling the same way as me and some people who are trying to figure out what this looks like, a couple of experts who are doing the thing and teaching the rest of us some techniques, some frameworks that we can use to think about this thoughtfully and with hope. With that said, I am so thrilled to introduce this group of panelists who will be speaking about their personal experiences, sharing stories, techniques from their professional work, and collaborating together to be a stronger network of energized and balanced environmental supporters and organizers. With that, I'd love to go around and have everyone introduce themselves. If you wouldn't mind sharing your name, pronouns if you wish, maybe where you're joining us from. I think this might be the most Washington panel we have on the entire summit this year. If you want to share your organization and role, and if you have any history with EarthCorps, feel free to share that as well.
Hi, my name is Chloe Lee. I'm joining you from beautiful, busy downtown Seattle. I am a co-founder of Cascade Forest Therapy and also a clinical hypnotherapist. My relationship with EarthCorps comes by way of Cascade Forest Therapy, where we do restoration work in partnership with forest bathing. And I'm just so pleased to be here. Thank you.
And my name is Denise McDermott. I am a psychotherapist that's in between the Tacoma, Seattle area. I'm also a nature and forest therapy guide with Cascadia Forest Therapy, a little bit newer. I'm not one of the co-founders. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. I like talking about this and getting ideas from people and figuring out how to best deal with this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth White. I am the program director here at EarthCorps, and I'm coming to you from our offices in Magnuson Park in Northeast Seattle. And my history with EarthCorps is long. I started as a Corps member in our flagship program back in 2002 and spent some time leading volunteer events around Seattle, about a decade. And now I've spent about a decade working in our programming side. And I'm so excited to be here and learn with these fantastic folks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nivi Achanta. I use she, her pronouns, and I am calling in from Fremont, Seattle, where I've lived for maybe 3 years now. I am so excited to be here because my work with just my own life and the organization I run, Soapbox Project, is all about how do we turn these big, scary feelings that we're experiencing about the climate crisis and global events, how do we really turn those into action? And so my work in a nutshell is really creating spaces for joy and connection and purpose in a world where it's really hard to be a human. So if you're feeling that way, I definitely get you, and I'm really excited to continue exploring those themes throughout this panel.
That's hitting me. I'd love to go around one more time. Maybe we can do the same order. I want to do a little bit more of a role deep dive. Could you talk about what you're doing, what your roles are, and specifically how you came to them? Maybe some things in your career or personal life that kind of led you into what you're doing now. And second part of that, what's energizing you about the work that you're engaging with right now? So maybe we can start with Chloe and just go through that order again.
Yeah, like Denise said, their Cascadia Forest Therapy was sort of born out of local guides, local forest therapy guides who all were doing this similar work, sort of gathering together and saying like, this would be better if we did it like the forest. Like, let's do this together. Let's grow together. Let's share resources and let's create this. So my role started there and just sort of like the idea level with Cascadia. And as we've evolved, I'm currently the treasurer of the organization, and I also am a guide. So I spend time out with participants in the forest, doing sessions and really enjoying that. As it is like a baby nonprofit, well, not a baby, but it's growing. It's growing. We all really put a lot of effort into all the dynamics of the organization. And so that feels really good. It's a very mycelial experience that we all have. I'm sure Denise will agree with that. I love the question, what's energizing me right now? Honestly, I wake up really early in the morning, and going outside early in the morning has been like the best thing. We've had this surprisingly dry season. Someone told me it's El Nino. I don't know what it is, but I'm loving it. This like dry, crisp freshness, like day over day over day. And for those of us in Seattle, a dry morning feels like a miracle. So yeah, that's feeling really good to me right now.
I'll take it from there. So when you asked me that, I was thinking so I'm a therapist, psychotherapist. I started back in like 1980s, which ages me a bit, but I started out working in a facility for severely psychiatrically disturbed adolescents, which is a really big thing to put on adolescents, but that's where I worked. It was an inpatient, probably 12 patients at a time. And to their credit, every year they would try and take these patients out for camping for like a week. And when I first started there, the first year happened and everyone was like, oh, well, we can't really do that because we have to staff the facility and staff the camp, and we can't do that because of Chris. Chris, we have to contain all of the time, and he needs to be managed. So there's no way we can do it. Well, we ended up doing it. And lo and behold, for that entire week, Chris is like cooking a cake over an open fire. Chris is like playing around in the trees. Chris was delightful for the week. Next year I'm there, I'm a little less green. Same conversation comes around. And it's, well, we can't really go because of Holly. There's no way we can have Holly out and about with other people in the public because we have to and she's out of control. But again, we went, and Holly constructed like the Annie play with all of the choreography, with all of the other clients coming in and out of the tent and playing this. And I was just like, okay. And for the whole week, Holly was happy and content. So I started to kind of grab that. And from then on, just in any practice I had, I would tend to take my kids outside, and we would talk while we were walking. We would talk while we were pulling leaves off trees. I then ended up working with a Head Start program, 3- and 4-year-olds. I would do meetings with teachers and parent groups about letting your child be outside and how important that was. And then I started to work with high schoolers with specific anxiety disorders. And I kind of had to fool the education system. Hope they're not all watching this, but I made them do birding so that it was a science thing. And then I took them to a refuge. And afterwards it was like, how are you guys feeling? And they were like, I feel happy. And they were, I feel like at peace. And one guy's like, I never knew this was like this. And then when I found out about the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy training, which trains the guides, I was like, oh, I'm all over that. So it just kind of has happened and morphed, and it makes sense. It just makes sense. It has always made sense. And I love that it's kind of a formal piece that has evidence behind it now, even though perhaps we never really needed the evidence, but there it is. So that's where I came to be where I am through my practice.
So my role at EarthCorps as the program director is to look at the programs we run. We run 3 main programs, our flagship crew-based program, and a volunteer specialist-based program. It's about community building and leading community events. And then a habitat specialist program, which is a little bit more about environmental restoration, project management, and some of the data and science behind that. And then I get to dabble in some of the youth programming that our community volunteer engagement team also puts together. But as the program director, I really get to think big about what is the conversation that our training participants, the people in our program, can have, right? And invite voices into that training and help create the scaffolding for a place to learn and learn from each other and build a network that at its best and at its strongest can sustain folks for a lifetime. I know that has been true for me. I came to EarthCorps fresh out of college. I had an English degree and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. But this sure feels overwhelming, and I get to move to Seattle and dig in the dirt for a year. I'm sure I'll find myself. And I did, not exactly in the way that I thought I would, as I'm still here 20 years later, but what a lovely thing, what a lovely journey that I'm so grateful for. And I think what hooked me was really that chance to do something really tangible about something that felt so overwhelming and huge, something like climate change. I got to tackle one plant, one park at a time. And I also found myself developing a community that was helping me through ups and downs and was deeper than anything I had experienced before. So when I had the opportunity to come on staff and lead volunteer experiences in Seattle parks, I was like, heck yeah, that sounds amazingly fun. I get to meet fun people who want to be outside and dig in the dirt with them. Let's do this. And that has evolved into into my role in the program team. I think the thing that keeps me energized right now is just learning. The people that come into the EarthCorps program know so much and come with such energy and so many ideas and so many questions. And so each year we run the program, it's a little bit different and it's fascinating. And so the real opportunity to learn from and with the folks at this organization is huge. And then I've also, I'm the parent of a 5-year-old, and learning with him is something that I think sits at the core of who I am right now, and helps me find that sense of wonder and bring that back to folks. So that's another little battery that I plug into.
Loving all of these stories. And I guess to answer the question of what energizes you first, I feel like I'm already feeling a lot better than half an hour ago. And Denise, this story of just kids being out in nature and feeling so happy. That was such a nice story to hear, because when I think about joy, it's not a superficial emotion of, you go to the store and you buy yourself a chocolate or something. It's like you can still access that when you have a really tough childhood or life circumstances or whatever. And I I love that we got to hear that from you. So a little bit about how I found my work. I am the founder and CEO of the organization I run, Soapbox Project. And when I first started it, I really felt like it was out of a place of helplessness and confusion. And Elizabeth, you were talking about this just now of you just wanted to do something about the climate crisis, about anything really. And a few years ago, I was working full time at a giant tech consulting company called Accenture. And I feel like many millennials and Gen Z people are sold this dream of you go to college and you work really hard in college. And then once you graduate, you'll finally be able to help people and save the world. And so I bought into that to many degrees. And I joined Accenture partially because they were talking about how you'll be able to make all this large scale change, all of this stuff. And I joined, and then I felt, quite frankly, that I was being a little bit scammed. And then I saw this road ahead of me that was great, that I'm earning this nice salary and I'm able to live within very nice means. But at the time, I was in San Francisco, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this very jarring feeling of walking down a street and one side of the street is like skyscrapers and people dressed in $1,000 suits, and the other side is some of the saddest parts of humanity, people not having a place to sleep or go to the bathroom. And so this was my life for about 3 years, and just every single day I was like, I've arrived at this place where I have the resources to do something. I'm sure I could carve out the time to do something, but I can't figure it out. And donating and volunteering and that kind of stuff, I just never felt like I plugged in into the right places. And so fast forward to 2018, California, where I was living, had the most destructive fire in its history, the Camp Fire. And that was really personal to me because my partner's family lives in Paradise, no longer lives in Paradise. And I remember wanting to do something. And finally, here was a cause where I knew people, and I knew people on the ground. I knew people in the consulting organization at Accenture that were free and they were not on a project. So I spent around 48 hours just emailing. All the leaders of the company were called John. I'm not kidding. They were all men named John. So I emailed all the Johns. I emailed them this proposal that I just drafted, kind of looking at various documents. And against all odds, at this 500,000 person company, they said, okay, Nivi, you can have the budget and a team to go to this place and do some work and learn from them and like volunteer and all of those things. And that shocked me because I was really just shooting my shot, expecting that I just tried my best and then I guess move on from the situation. And that was such a turning point of we really don't know the power that we have as individuals, because I did not come to this work from a place of expertise of any kind. I had just graduated college a few years before that. I had no idea what I was doing in terms of disaster relief or like tactical community engagement, but I got my budget and I went out there and I learned a ton. And I think the most important thing I learned is that just truly internalizing that anyone can make a difference, but you have to understand the levers for change and you have to understand whom to talk to and what is effective and what is the work that sustains. So then eventually I founded Soapbox Project based on those principles. And so one of the things we do now that I'm sure I'll talk about a bit later is sending people bite-sized action plans on what is the issue, what can you actually do about it? Because I just, through my own experiences, you really don't have to be like, you don't have to have decades of experience. It's great that you do, but I think I see people being deterred when they're like, I'm just an ordinary person. And I really like to tell people, if you are paying attention, you're interested in doing something, you're already going beyond being an ordinary person. And there is so much that you can do that you just don't realize because we're not taught to understand our own capacity for change. So that's me in Soapbox.
Wow. Goodness, thank you everybody so much. Before we dive too much deeper, I'd love to get a little bit of shared vocabulary. I think a lot of folks that are tuning in are familiar with what we're talking about, but some might not be. So they're here, they're climate anxiety, what are you talking about? This panel popped up. I believe this was the very first panel when we were dreaming about the Global Learning Summit. This was the first panel that we were like, this is what we want to do. We want to prioritize getting some folks together for this. And one of the reasons is because of conversations with Elizabeth and the rest of the program team, where we were noticing a difference. People were not showing up for the program out of hope and excitement, but out of despair or fear. And there was this big change in this theme that's been emerging. And EarthCorps needs to figure it out, like, what do we do? How do we equip these people? What does it look like as an organization to help people that are navigating this? And that's something we're very much still in the process of, and is one of the reasons that we're especially thrilled to have some other folks here to guide us along the way. But Elizabeth, I want to throw it to you first, just to get some shared vocabulary. When we say climate anxiety or climate despair, what are we talking about? Could you just give us a little bit of shared vocab on what we mean?
Yeah, definitely. So I think again, this came into the conversation for us in our program because of the different motivation that folks had in coming to us, right? And it's not to say that we have a survey that people fill out when they're coming into the program that is like, what is motivating you? And they like circle hope, you know, or like despair. But it was more like the kind of grounding trainings and conversations that we were having, the work that we were doing on the ground, it wasn't landing and having the same sort of like uplift that it had in the past. This is what we were noticing. And so I started looking into why that might be, doing some of the standard things that you might do, like let's research Gen Z and find out. But also at the same time, I was pregnant and had a large internal debate and external with my wife, obviously, that if we were going to do this or not, but about what it meant to bring a child into this world. And this is where I first came into a more formal discussion around climate anxiety, eco distress, eco anxiety. These are all words that are often used interchangeably to describe a chronic fear of environmental doom. And that is the American Psychological Association's definition of climate anxiety. Again, not to pathologize, but to name. And we've really found that in just naming this, there's been a lot of power. And in saying this is a feeling, this is true, this is valid, we see this, and it isn't a pathology. It is a just and right reaction to the world that we're in. Has done a lot for our members. It's done a lot for myself personally, knowing that this has a name and is something that other folks are experiencing. I think some other ideas when I've been researching this that have come up are a sense of ontological security that has been breached. So ontological security being like a feeling of continuity. Like, you know what spring is going to be like next year. You are planning a vacation for a few years down the road with your family, right? And the news we're hearing about climate on top of the pandemic have really challenged that sense that we can plan that far in advance. And then another term that has really resonated for me in this is, I'm gonna maybe not say this right, but solastalgia, which is a homesickness that you have while you're still at home. So knowing that things are changing, knowing that spring is getting warmer, spring is getting rainier, there's less likely that snow will come, sort of beginning to mourn the passing or the change of something while you still have it. All of these feelings are things that I personally have experienced, and our members in our program report feelings of as they're out in nature daily doing this work on the ground. Many of these feelings can become more present as you're working in the actual environment and creating that deeper connection. And so, but I think sort of one of the tricks is in recognizing this in ourselves and sort of beginning to name it. And so I'd actually love to turn to the rest of the panel and see if anybody wants to speak to like how we recognize specifically climate anxiety in ourselves or in others.
Well, I would jump in with, I appreciate you stating that labeling it and naming it was helpful. Anytime I work with anybody who is dealing with anxiety, it always starts with one thought, and then I'm using my bed, and then it builds, and it gets heavy, and it's so much. So if it starts, and then you can go, oh, that's climate anxiety. The fact that you're even identifying it stops the build and stops the weight. And the weight is what can be debilitating because we can get lost in it. But being able to go, everybody is right. It's an extremely valid and appropriate response. That is true. That is a true story. And it's also a true story that we are here right now and we can have joy and address that story at the same time. We don't have to get lost in it, but labeling it is really important because otherwise your brain is trying to figure it out and trying to solve it. That's what our brain does. The difference between stress and anxiety, in my view, stress is something that's occurring and you think about it to figure out what you need to do to undo the stress. And then you figured it out, you need to fill out that form, you need to turn it in, and the stress reduces. And that's how our brain functions. But if it's functioning in that same way, when we're unable to resolve it, it just keeps spinning and just keeps rolling. And it's trying to be helpful. Your anxiety is your body's way of trying to be helpful to you. That was a realization I came to when I went through a huge bout of terrible anxiety and depression. I wouldn't wish on it anyway, but at one point, I just went, oh, it's trying to help me. It's trying to raise a little bit of an alarm. And just recognizing that my body wasn't trying to hurt me or damage me or confuse me. It was using the only function it had to help me. So then I got to be able to go, okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you trying to warn me and do the alarm. Thank you for that. I think I'm going to take it from here and go this direction, but labeling it for what it is, I think that's really important.
I'll also add, Denise, the image of it weighing, like it building and building. I think that was so real for me, especially with someone that hadn't been working with a therapist when I it feels weird to say when I first started feeling climate anxiety because I grew up into a world where climate change was always real, called many different things. But we learned about recycling when I was 7, and I remember going home to my parents and we should get a recycle bin. And I think for me, the biggest manifestation of these big scary feelings was really feeling like it was pressing down upon me and not knowing what to do about it or how to possibly come out of it. And it didn't even feel like something that fit into the normal, like you Google mental health and that's not, because I was like, my life is kind of good. I have a good amount of privilege. I have friends, I have a community. Why do I feel like this concept of the world is crushing me so much? And so I think for me, even before I'm so glad we have this term that's more well known of climate anxiety, eco anxiety, those things. But I think that like being able to recognize that, exactly as you said, that these feelings are a a valid response in your body trying to help you. I wish someone had said that to me earlier and kind of like shown me that what's happening in the world can and should affect your mind and body, because I think that we're kind of, I don't know if brainwashed is the right word, but I'm going to say it anyway, like brainwashed into a society where the world is like out here as one thing, and then you have your individual life and your family and your friends as this other thing. And so it was very confusing, where I was like, all my problems are coming from this thing in the world, and my individual life is kind of fine, but it doesn't feel that way. And I think that was really confusing. And having even spaces to unpack these things is something that's pretty new over the last few years, and not something that I had when I was feeling the worst. And so I am hoping that this, like having these conversations and naming these to start, will be a really powerful foundational step for people that feel physically crushed by the weight of these emotions.
I love this. I feel like it's like toss the baton, pass the baton, pass the baton. And I'm going to keep rolling with this. I saw Denise do this with two hands. It was like these two things. One of them is like anxiety or despair, and one of them is joy. And I just wanted to land together on the question of like, how did this collective anxiety get here? Like, how did it culminate to the point where it's well established? Like our minds and our nervous system, right? Like anxiety has a physiological experience. We like, it feels tight or jittery or sweaty or uncomfortable. Like it has a body sensation. Like, how does that stuff get there? And how does it weave its way in? And I ask these questions a lot in my clinical practice. And there's this sort of formula for how an idea seeds itself deep within us to cause that nervous system reaction. And what's happening with our world and our earth right now, it has this energy behind it of, it's a highly emotional experience for us. To see the images is so emotional. It's devastating. It breaks your heart. It makes you feel intense emotion, which is really important to understand. It also is something that we're repeatedly exposed to. Like it's images over images over images, more and more every year, more intimately. Like Nivi said, like, and then it's your family, and then it's someone you know, and then you're seeing, do I know anyone in Hawaii? Do I know anyone where this fire is? Like, it's so intimate and repetitive. So this highly emotional piece, it has that. This repetitive piece, it has that. It also has this quality of like, all of us as a culture and as this organism together, like we are having to say yes to something that feels really wrong. It feels wrong for us to watch this happen. And yet we're having to say, yes, okay, like, I guess this is where we're going, even though I hate it with every bone of my body. And so that becomes a really powerful idea that no doubt is going to course through your body in all these ways. No doubt it's going to feel deep, and it's going to feel really real. And what I love about this conversation is like some of those same components are also the antidote, in that like part of our work, part of my work is, how do we create a high emotion, positive experience of wonder and awe that has this supercharge of emotion that lands so deep? And how do we get motivated to do that repetitively expose ourselves to the beauty and the joy and the wonder and the like, supercharge that, like make that happen all the time for ourselves. So I'm saying Denise doing this with her hands, and it's like the mechanisms of the mind, the mechanisms of how we internalize an idea are there for us to use to our benefit in some ways. And so that's some of the tools that we get to talk about here, is like, okay, so we know that it has to be really emotional. It has to be often. We have to move towards something that feels awesome. And that for me feels like hope. It feels like, okay, there's a little power in that.
Mhm.
There's a power in both of these palms.
Yeah. That, that makes me think that, I mean, there's so much effort that we put on managing our emotions, right? Being professional, like staying in your lane, like so much effort. And I feel this as a parent, like how do you teach someone to feel their emotions, but also like stay within like what is acceptable, when acceptable is generally defined as like pretty emotionless, I would say. And so there's this like deep connection or disconnection, I think, from with our emotion. And then in some way, like once you unlock that, not only do you unlock joy and love, but you also unlock grief, right? Because again, back to this, like this coin, that, grief is a consequence of love, right? That connection also has that inverse reaction. And I think that's definitely something that I've navigated in myself, is like, how can I let myself fall even more in love with something that is fleeting and leaving? Yeah. And that grief side. And some of what I have dabbled in, and again, I'm just learning, but is like that need to embrace that grief, to move to the other side, to action. And if we avoid the emotion, we're stuck. So I don't know. I guess my question is how do you get people to plug back in to that emotion?
Yeah. So you've used the word manage your emotions, which is typically people, I need to manage, I need to control my anxiety, I need to learn to deal with it. I always think of your anxiety as like a little person. Most people know a little person somewhere. And if that little person walked in your door, would you be like, oh, nope, or come here, I'm going to manage you, or I'm going to control you? No, what would you do? And they're like, well, I'd probably scoop them up and put them on my lap. And it's like, yeah, it takes a tremendous amount of energy. If I push something away because I don't want it, I mean, I'd get exhausted. If I'm pushing on a wall, I would be exhausted. It feels so much lighter to just pull it in and say, oh, hi. And I don't have to do anything with it sometimes. And if you think about it as a little kid in that same way, if you bring a little kid in and you're like, oh, come here, you'll actually, when I worked with Head Start, when a teacher would say, oh, come, you could see the little kid's shoulders go, oh. They didn't really have to do much more. They were just brought in and acknowledged. But if they were like, oh, I need you to go, I need you to take time out, this is wrong, they never undid. But it was just, oh, come here. And they would, right, then they would very happily come and skitter next. So being with all of your emotions as if they are just, they belong there, and it's okay that they're there, and to scoop them in. And scooping them in lets them move past. When they're finished, they will walk out the back door. If you never let them in the front door, they're always like knocking, and they're always like trying to break down the door, and then you're like, let them in, have a seat, it's okay. And then they will move along, and another one will come in, and be okay with that movement. I think people are sometimes afraid of the negative ones. That's not a word I would use, but they're afraid of them. So they try and hold on to that joy, but then that creates guilt. So now they have guilt because they're ignoring the problem. And it's like, it's okay. You tend to it. So instead of managing your emotions, you tend to them. I tend to myself. I tend to my emotions. I tend to whatever is there. Tending is just a very gentle, it's a very tender. You tend to your garden. You don't hack your garden down. You tend to it. But yeah, just tending to all of them, and then they can all move. And you're not judging one as better or worse than another. So I love that.
reframe so much. And I'll also add the conversation about climate anxiety, at least on a mainstream level. Like, I don't know what it's like in, psychotherapist office and stuff, but for me, as a person experiencing it and with my friends and stuff, seems fairly new, and something that is coming along with it in the little garden of many emotions concept is very valid rage. And I think that's something, especially women in today's society, or people, like, it's like a very discouraged emotion if you're like feminine of any sort. And if it, like, as a more masculine manifestation, it is equated with violence and destruction. And the other day, not based on anything clearly scientific, but in one of our Soapbox project meetings, we did this thing called a rage room. And all it was is talking about what you're pissed off about, and people just listen. And like, we just decided to do this, and there's probably people on this panel that have more reasons on why something like that could be so powerful. But I think, like, one main theme that I'm experiencing is there's just not there's like not a place for you to have your emotional garden, right? Like, we use these words like manage climate anxiety or control your emotions or whatever, and it's very new that we're seeing people have these discussions that actually it's good to have all your emotions and bring your emotions along, and they're important for you. And I guess, like, I feel that where many of us, especially women of color, are taught to suppress our rage. And I know for me, that was a big, inextricable part of my climate anxiety. Is, I think, even more than anxiety, I was feeling this sense of rage and feeling like I couldn't put it anywhere. I couldn't go around screaming at people, I couldn't, and I wouldn't. And learning how to deal with that. So the beginning of my rage journey, I guess, but learning how to understand that it's there has been a big part of the whole climate anxiety conversation, and one that I feel is not really getting named. So I don't have a point of any of this, but I just wanted to say that that's something that I feel like, especially women of color, are like, you should not be angry at any cost, and it is harmful to you if you express anger. And I think what is actually harmful is the result of that unexpressed anger, and that's been a huge block. And by sharing that with other people in spaces that we create together has been like one of the most powerful discoveries for me of this year, because you don't really think of, oh, rage is a key to unlocking joy, but really there's something so powerful about sitting together with people, being really mad about something really deep, and even if no immediate solution comes out of it, it's like, wow, we really needed to get on the same page, get that like out of our bodies and into the air. So that just wanted to put that in this space as well.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I think definitely, I think holding that space for that emotional garden is so key. And it's something that takes such time and intention and work, right? To sort of understand, like, what is in my emotional garden, and what needs a little more love and watering, and how do I do this? And I think another thing that comes up often in the program, and as we think about what we do next, is like, no, but what do I do? Like, no, this isn't about me. There's like a lot to do out there, and this is urgent. People are dying. The earth is, we're losing time, we're losing years, we're gaining degrees. Like, I don't have time to tend my emotional garden. And you're not wrong at all, but so what would you say to someone that's at that place?
I would go right to the sweetness of the conversation of really, what does nature give us? Like, what's the gift of nature? If we're going to be in the spirit and the actions of reciprocity, first, recognize the gift. What is the gift of nature? Okay, so we receive, obviously, food, shelter, a space for curiosity. We receive beauty, inspiration, texture. We receive color, medicine. Those are the gifts that we receive, and those are also the asks of us. Those are the lateral ask, like that's what we get. And then how do you respond to the gift of medicine? How do you respond to the gift of joy? How do you respond to the gift of pleasure? How do you respond to the gift of color, texture, beauty? It's that two-hand thing. And the purposefulness, the sense of steady purpose that comes from saying, okay, in my little bubble, in my little world, I am fully committed to the actions of reciprocity in giving joy in trade for joy, beauty in trade for beauty, appreciation in trade for appreciation, curious, sort of inspired gifting back. Like we get all these really kind of inspired, wild gifts from nature, things that we need to stay alive. And so those types of wonderings that we can reflect on in our own little sphere are really helpful. And there are some of those things where you say, yes, I am going to stay angry because it's infuriating. And I'm also going to flex both muscles, and I'm going to cultivate a powerful reciprocity that recognizes the gifts and gives back in a similar way. I think that empowering ourselves, like we've been saying, with I can feel two things. And I can feel two things fully and completely, and that only makes me more open to this whole experience. It feels really important to take those sort of looks at the inner landscape and really ask the question, in my anger, is there any way that I can feed beauty? In my sadness, is there any way that I could feed curiosity or joy? And it at least gives us a sense of purpose, of gifting back and forth. Yeah.
You were saying that there was that you had your own little bubble. It reminded me when if you think of your own little puzzle piece, and I always tell people that the first thing you have to do is you have to take care of your own puzzle piece first, because if you don't, it gets shreddy on the sides and it gets floppy and maybe bent or maybe kicked off the table and put on the floor. So you've really got to take care of your puzzle piece. And once that is nice and solid, and it's a good solid puzzle piece, then you get to tend to any other puzzle piece that you are touching. And what I'm touching with my puzzle piece is going to be different than anyone else's. So Elizabeth, you were talking about your son. I mean, part of my puzzle piece for 20 years has been raising my children to be caring individuals who take care of the planet. My son just graduated with a zoological degree. Can't find a job yet, but that's a second story. But part of my puzzle piece was my children, and it was a huge part, and I was in charge of that. Part of my puzzle piece was working with the teens and what could I do with them. And I had them do a project to try and get natural habitats in the neighborhood around the school. So that was something I was able to touch. If I can, and other people just have different things. So I used to feel like, oh, I'm not going to do enough. I can't do enough. But then I was like, who are the most powerful, lovely beings on this planet? And at the time I was like, not to give up Barack Obama, I thought he was pretty great. Dalai Lama, pretty great. Right now, the Pope is quite great as well. In that, they're not fixing everything. They can't change everything. So to have that expectation of myself and to carry guilt of not changing everything was just ridiculous. So I was like, okay, my puzzle piece, what am I able to take care of but at the center of it, we've got to be okay. We've got to be solid.
Mhm.
And figure out what you're touching and what you can do. And the final one, we got to have some trust.
Mhm.
I got to have trust that Chloe has her puzzle piece and she's doing things that I wouldn't have a clue how to do. And you guys have your puzzle pieces and you're creating all of these things. So I have to trust, and for my own health, I need to notice that. I need to notice that there are these people doing wonderful things and put my attention on that. And it doesn't mean that I'm ignoring the devastation. That's still going on, but it isn't helpful to me sometimes to overload on that. Most of the time it's not. I want to be aware. I tend to read it as opposed to watching anything because I can control a little bit about what's going in. But then I get to turn my attention to all of these other puzzle piece people who have their puzzle piece, and we're all kind of working on the same puzzle. And to me, I have to let go of some of that responsibility, because you have to go home and be with a 5-year-old child. You can't carry that with you all day long. That isn't healthy. It's not good for us. And then we can't do anything helpful. So I like that a bubble. It's your what are you touching? What have you got control over? And take care of it. But
I'm going to pluck one thing out that you just said, Denise, which I felt like went by really quickly, but it was I think this is like a tool of empowerment. And it was this way that you were talking about, what am I looking for? And what am I looking for? How am I going to be sort of looking at what other people are doing and being an appreciation? How am I going to be an observation of my little world? And I call that like our search pattern. Like, what are we looking for? And that I'm all about the practical tools. I'm like, this is another practical tool for us. So it's like, ask yourself, like, what is your search pattern? And this repetitive search pattern we have, like, it's easy for us to notice when things don't feel good. And it's a habit and a commitment to notice the sweetness, or when something is going great. And then, like Elizabeth said, let that emotion have its full expression. And I just love the idea of us all collectively, like, let's do this, develop a search pattern for each other's contributions, and like that we can all collectively celebrate those things as a common effort and be like, yeah, we are doing a lot. We can do a lot. Like, let's look for those things, because that we have to allow ourselves to go there. We have to allow ourselves to see it, and see it with as much attention and attunement as we see the disturbing images that come up all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and it makes me think about also, like, in the research that I'm doing, one of the paths forward is really a path of relationship and collective action, right? This recognition that there's not one of us that can do it alone, that we are connected, that and that what makes movement sustainable is having many hands and many contributors, right? So that we can all take turns leading when we can and resting when we can. And yeah, I'm curious if that brings up anything for this group. I'm curious how that connects in with the Soapbox project, and how that could create platform or connection for people to like find that one thing and hold their piece, or see the pieces of others.
Yeah, first of all, everyone in this group is like the royalty of good analogies, and I love them. And I'm gonna keep building on the puzzle piece one, because that's such a good visual framework for why taking care of yourself matters, and why you can't just do your one puzzle. And so this collective action piece, so I have gone on this wild pendulum from when I first started Soapbox. It was very much like, oh, you need to, stop fast fashion. Like, you need to buy less stuff, and like, you need to not eat meat. Or I didn't say that one because I didn't want to go there at the time, but all of these things. And then soon after that, I feel like I swung all the way in the other direction of only systems level change matters, and it's corporations that are causing all the emissions and whatever. And now that I am older and wiser and still probably not all that wise, I feel that I have kind of settled in this thing that makes way more sense than the other things. And also through reading and researching and meeting other people feels a lot more grounded than my that only this matters and only that matters. It's really that we are, again, like, this idea of interconnection is so obvious in nature, and it is I believe, purposefully made obscure to us because systems of power that exist today that are harming us really benefit when we see each other not as interconnected at all. So I think what the approach that we're taking at Soapbox, still, I would say, for example, the first thing that you might do is sign up for our free bite-sized newsletter, and that picks different themes. And I try to balance those monthly topics from more individually focused stuff to more like what collective action you can take. But just let me use fast fashion as an example, because we've actually covered that a few times, and it's interesting to see how the lenses change. So one of the things that we'll do is we have our monthly topic and we break it down into 4 weeks of modules. And when we first started, like the action, like the act module, so it goes read, watch, act, and reflect. And the act module, which is the third Wednesday of the month, it used to be very much donate to this cause or like do this individual action. And actually, the biggest thing that I observed, I think that helped me swing my pendulum a little, is people would respond back, hey, I haven't bought anything in 6 years and I still feel so lonely and I don't know how to talk to my friends and family without coming across as judgmental. So I'm taking all of these actions and I feel like I'm not making a difference. And then, some of the science backs that up of if you as one person out of almost 8 billion are not using a plastic straw, that's important to your habits, but it only fully matters when you use that to share with others. And so anyway, this is all to say that like I am such a big believer in collective action, and I also understand why it can be such a challenge for people to get involved. And I think there are so many barriers that make it hard. And I think the first one that we really have to name is that many times activist groups have burned people and have harmed people and have made people feel like if you don't know everything and if you're not showing up to this space with decades of knowledge about social and environmental injustices, you don't belong. And I think the lens that I try to take, I mean, just like anyone, I can be judgmental and harmful, I'm sure. But the lens that we really, really try to take at Soapbox is embracing you as a human first. That's like really trying to live their best life on this planet. I don't think anyone really wants to do justice work as something that like they want to do 24/7. I think it's more that we feel called to it because we need to do it. People mostly just want to hang out with their friends and spend time with their loved ones and spend time in nature. And so we try to create that belonging lens first, because I personally don't think you can have lasting, meaningful collective action if people don't feel like they belong to each other or to a movement or to the planet. And so really understanding at Soapbox specifically and like at dinner parties that I throw or whatever, understanding how can we as a foundation create a space that feels good to be a part of. We kind of throw this term around a lot, like safe spaces, right? And one thing that I'm starting to learn and say more is that as a facilitator and as an event organizer and a community organizer, I can do my best to create a safe space, but it can only be safe if we're all invested in it and we're all helping each other feel like we belong. So our framework has evolved over the years, but I think now I would say it starts with that pillar of belonging, and then back to the puzzle piece, like understanding what your piece is, how you can take care of it, and like how to identify your neighboring puzzle pieces, and then continuing with helping people plug that, like helping people even zoom out and see what is the puzzle, what do you actually want. And I think that's one question, and I'll end my little rambly spiel here, but I think that's one question that I love to ask and should be asked more is like, what do you want, right? We can sit and fight climate change all day long, but I think that's a really incomplete and like not joyful way of viewing the situation. And I have found over the last couple of years, even asking people, what does your version of the planet, if everything went right in 10 years, in 20 years, in 100 years, what would it look like? And that has been probably the single coolest part of my work. And we try to do that in every event, is do like a little futuristic futures thinking vision exercise. And there's actually a lot of behavioral psychology behind that, that like those kinds of activities train your brain to be more resilient, both when you imagine good things and bad things in the future. But doing that exercise has been so cool, because I think one of the saddest spoils of climate destruction is that it puts us into despair. And these more like negative emotions, I don't know what else to call them, because they're important, but things like hopelessness and despair and like anger and pessimism, they have their place, especially when you are trying to find one specific solution. So one analogy that I read is like, if you have a rock in your shoe, that is when you want to feel pain. You specifically want to get the rock out of the shoe. But if you're trying to imagine a better world, like we need to change the way that we have these conversations, instead of like fight and pain. And we can honor all of those things, but I think like the collective action, Elizabeth, that you're talking about, I think it has to be rooted in belonging and rooted in a shared vision of what is possible, and rooted in the, I guess, going back to trust, like that we can do this, and really starting there, because there's so many actions that people can take that are really important, like driving less and flying less and like eating plant forward and all of these wonderful things. But I think that it only works if you recognize your unique place and what makes you happy and the people in your life and what's possible for you. So
Yeah.
those are my thoughts. Those were a little all over the place, but that is what I have to
It's
say.
great. And it takes us back to that puzzle piece idea of like, it's important that you see your piece and that you tend to your piece and you keep the edges crisp, and when you find your place, you belong in it, right? But the puzzle analogy also works because when you zoom out, there's a picture there, right? And I think so often, I think Chloe, you spoke to this, like the power of like the despair narrative, right? And like that is what we're fed over and over again. So we can't even imagine a future that's not that. I mean, think of dystopian fiction, right? It's just like a juggernaut.
There's too much of it.
There's so much. But where are those stories that are the beautiful vision, right? That we all need to get behind, and understand how our puzzle piece fits into that picture. And so that practice of cultivating that joy and wonder and the world that you want to see, is so important. And I think, and daunting, right? Because we're so used to this other narrative. But a lot of what we explore in our flagship program at EarthCorps is this like self-team community, right? Like, who am I? How am I showing up in this small team that I'm working in? And then how does my team go out and impact change? And that's what I'm hearing from you all, is that's a blueprint, right? That you see too echoed in your work of understanding all of those elements and how they nest together, and help inform where we put our puzzle piece in this.
I also want to say like one last thing on this puzzle topic is like the puzzle metaphor is so good, because puzzles are something people are excited to do, right? Like if you made your metaphor like, okay, digging a hole in the ground, some people are excited by that. if there's a purpose, but like puzzles are a hobby for so many people. And I think like one missing piece of many conversations about collective action is like we need more spaces instead of whatever going to a bar after work, or your like offices have those like mixology sessions or trivia nights, and those are all cool and they should keep existing. But we need places that feel that good, where if you're hanging out with a friend, you are actually like, hey, you know what? We should use this to go forest bathing, or we should, plant a garden, or those kinds of things. And I feel like the spaces, that is one huge opportunity that anyone, regardless of their skills or their expertise or whatever, like you're probably hanging out with your friends and your family. You're probably doing activities. And so it's like, how do you find activities that contribute to better connection with people that you care about, because that's why you're gathering? And then also, why not sneak in a little bit of activism and action, because that actually helps people connect with their purpose. And I really just believe that so many people see this concept of activism as negative, and like to go to a protest and get screamed at, and like that has not been my experience. But I think the reason it hasn't been my experience is because I have had the honor to create joyful spaces. And I think that's like one big missing piece, is like we have to do our part to like change the narrative around like climate change and around activism, and just like be like, hey, you know what, add this to a list of other fun things you could be doing on a weekend, so it doesn't feel like a whole chore.
I love that, Nivi. That's like, so what's coming up, and based on like Elizabeth, you said the word wonder, which like always like perks me up. Like in the work that Denise and I do in the forest, it's like curiosity, wonder, and awe rehabilitation services. It's like, how do you get back in touch with that sense of wonder in a really big way? And what Nivi's talking about is like, I'm landing frequently on this term that I love, that is exactly what you're describing, which is collective effervescence. It's collective effervescence is, if I'm looking at this like process of like, how do we get to collective action? It's like it bubbles out of this collective effervescence, which is this word that describes people getting together and getting into this like feeling that rises up together. And it, we notice it in the violent category of activism. That's a version of it. We notice it at a really good concert. We notice it when we're like playing basketball. We notice it when we're like singing along with other people. It's this like wired into us way of knowing that we belong, knowing that we're connected, getting into that collective feeling space. And I love the idea of saying like, when we get into that collective spirit, we can trust the action that unfolds out of that place. It is so like steady, the power of like people bubbling up together. And that would make our pursuit exactly what Nivi said. Like, okay, if step one is get effervescent and bubbly together, then how are we going to do that? Where are we going to meet? Where are we going to do this thing where we all effervesce? Is it going to be over a cup of tea? Are we going to go out in the forest? Whatever it is, are we going to go collect some rocks? How do we seek that effervescent feeling together, knowing that from that is born conscious, beautiful action that's in alignment with our values and in alignment with joy and the power of all of us working together? Calmer, kinder, more creative, clear-headed, sense of belonging, all these really wonderful things. Yeah. Denise, I wonder if you can, I really want to hear your perspective on the sort of collectivity or this connection piece of forest bathing, and how that weaves into the action piece of climate interaction or anything. I just want to know your perspective about that.
Well, a couple things popped in my head. So the last forest bathing we did actually together, we did a retreat. And I am a pretty solitary, folk, reserved, perhaps someone might say. But we had a group of, I think, 14 people that all showed up. We'd never met before. And I can be on, I can be hospitable and gather, but I'm aware of my own, senses with other people around me. But about the session was an all-day session. So, but about like maybe 2 hours into our forest bathing session, you send people out in forest bathing. You tend to have a partnership invitation with the forest. You kind of decide. So the invitation might be, go introduce yourself to a tree in some way. And there's a difference. But by hour 2, we just all had this little sense, and it's more, I feel it more maybe because I am a bit reserved, but like I ended up walking by one of the participants and he was just dragging a big stick behind him and making things through the dirt. And I looked over and I kind of smiled and he kind of smiled, and we were all kind of just on the same page because we literally were hanging out with other beings that were not in a hurry. They were just being. And it really gave permission for us as beings, because I am no better or worse than a tree or a bug or a leaf. And you start to get that once you're hanging out in there for a little bit. So it allowed me to just be. There was no tree telling me I'm overly reserved. There was no one telling me that I should be more social. There was nothing. They were all just like, here we are doing our thing. And pretty soon everybody was like, yeah, here we all are. We're just doing our thing. And it feels good. And we're all kind of accepted by the beings around us. And then we're accepted by each other via being all together in that space. And then we typically have a kind of a sharing afterwards. And these people I hadn't met before. And you have a gentleman who's tearful and expressing some strong things. You have somebody else who's so grateful, and you have somebody else who was dealing with some grief, and but it all kind of came together. And it's a really beautiful practice in that sense. So, and then I always just go back to people protect what they know. As far as it being reciprocated, you don't typically have somebody doing a breast cancer walk that hasn't had breast cancer or hasn't had somebody around them with breast cancer. Same with autistic spectrum disorder. If somebody's on that walk, it's because they know that in some way. People end up getting to know the world around them, and then we want to take care of that world around us. And that's a natural thing that occurs. It's like, oh, this is really lovely, and I want to know what kind of tree is that, and you want to protect it. So it ends up being kind of a common feeling, effervescent. I like that. We all kind of bubbled up, quietly effervescent. But yeah, and the trees can be, in the training to be a certified guide, there's these elements of it where you are supposed to go out for like a whole day or for 3 hours and just be out in the wild by yourself with maybe a little bit of water, but nothing else, thing. And the word that I always come back with when I've done those elements is just stay. The trees and the beings around me, they're not doing anything. They're not talking to me. They're not giving me advice. They're just staying there while I'm staying there. And it ends up just feeling so healing and giving me whatever I need and me noticing different things. So that word stay always strikes me, to just stay with what you're at. And we tend to move so quickly. If I would have been with that group of 14 people for 15 minutes, I probably would have quietly exited and done something else. But staying and can really build that sense of community and sense of belonging and acceptance. So that is something forest therapy is very helpful in doing. But I don't know if that answered your question at all.
Yeah, it totally. Thank you. Yeah, I think that what you brought up in that like vivid image of being in this group of people where everyone's having this broad spectrum of emotions simultaneously in this similar energetic space it's really like the hallmark of forest therapy. And like Nivi was talking about, like, where do we take all of these feelings and have them all at the same time and be there with them collectively? And I think that in terms of our work, that's one of the key pieces, like, that we are trained to and aim to cultivate, is emotionally accessible space. Like, everybody there, bring it here, it's safe here, and it's going to come out here, and just leave it, just like let it rip. And it happens really sweetly and beautifully in these practices that we get to do. A lot of our work is like, we're guides, so we use our words, we talk a little bit. We talk a little bit less than you'd think, but what we do in a huge way as guides is we demonstrate with our bodies and our body language how to be in that state of being, like Denise was saying. And it's, body language is powerful. When a couple people start to do the stuff of being, do the stuff of emoting, it invites and allows all of that diversity to be there together. And it's like, it's such a sweet experience. And yeah, Nivi, we're gonna bring your whole team. We're all gonna go forest bathing, and we're just gonna we can do a rage room in the forest.
I am literally excited that I found out about your work. So I cannot wait for this to keep playing out. And I don't know if any of you has read the Monk and Robot series. It's like, I don't know if it's even technically sci-fi, but one of the things that I've been exploring is I'm so done with dystopian. I'm not, you do not tell me to read anything dystopian. Like, I already have enough in the world. And so I've just been on the hunt for all these like little pleasant, either solar punk things or just anyway. So this series by Becky Chambers has this monk and a robot, and the idea is this world is, I don't know, a few hundred years in the future maybe, and things are fine, and like half of the population is humans and half of the population is robots, and it's not that you can't socialize, it's just that they've been kind of staying in their own halves of the world, and this monk goes out to find his purpose and he meets a robot, and that's what it's about. And there's this quote, the robot is like getting kind of annoyed when the monk is like talking about purpose, and like nature versus humans. And the robot says, "You are not separate or other. You're an animal, and animals have no purpose. Nothing has a purpose. The world simply is. If you want to do things that are meaningful to others, fine, good, so do I. But if I wanted to crawl into a cave and watch stalagmites with Frost Frog for the remainder of my life, that would also be fine and good. You keep asking why your work is not enough, and I don't know how to answer that because it is enough to exist in the world and marvel at it. You don't need to justify that or earn it. You are allowed to just live. That is all most animals do." I feel like the concept of staying really reminded me of that.
Yeah.
Yes, that is all most animals do. I think of that all the time when we're trying to have people be in their bodies and being aware of their bodies. I think humans forget that they have a body. We watch animals and we see them in their body doing things, squirrels or birds, and we look at them as if they're moving through the life in a body. I'm doing the same thing. I just happen to have this internal thing going on. But when I can kind of set that aside a little bit, it's quite delightful to move through the world with my body and my senses. It's so much more pleasant.
Yeah. Well, and I think that this, in bringing us back to like the anxiety that I feel, people coming into the program, that like despair, versus that hope, I think the thing that's been hardest, as we begin each program year, is like how much work it takes to find that state of collective effervescence, right? I feel like it's that people are coming to us with more weight. It's harder for them to bubble. It takes more time to percolate. And I think what's something that I'm taking away from today is the necessity of feeling, like tapping back into that feeling, and the necessity of imagining something joyful and wonderful and alternative to the dystopian is key, right? To actually building action that is intentional and sustainable and healing and countering, right, that anxiety, moving things forward, building that collective, building that sense of belonging. And yeah, so when we think about climate anxiety, recognizing that, embracing, not just like navigating our way through it or managing our way through it, but embracing something different is the tack. And I've so appreciated like hearing from each of you ways to tap into that, to make that happen, and to feel right and just and enough. So I just really want to take a moment to appreciate you in the conversation here.
I love that. I feel like it needs to be said that for anyone who feels this way, like we're out here, there you have people, like you have people. We are 100% here. Like you have people, there are people that want to go into the forest and just like sit around and play with little mushrooms. There are people who want to just go like breathe the air with you slowly. Like those people are there, and they always will be, and they always have been, and you're one of them, and it's made for us to do that. And I just had this whole little mental movie play out, Elizabeth, while you were talking, and it was this image where I was like, wow, you have the best forest therapy guide at your disposal, Elizabeth. It is your child. No one that I know is a better demonstrator of what we are capable of in relationship to nature than children. One of the ways that we describe forest bathing for people who don't know what it is, we say it's like adults playing slowly in the woods, but it's like truly as close as we can get to that essential bit of self. It's like, oh, it feels so good. It feels so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I think that as an experiential learning program, I think part of what we're doing is reminding people of the way that humans have learned forever, right? Is by being in the world and trying things and doing it and seeing what happens. And through that experience, that touch, that the senses, right? And reconnecting with that most essential way of learning through this sort of like backdoor frame of experiential learning, right? We have to put it into this frame, but it's taking us back to be that animal, that creature that is just in the world, learning what it is, learning what it means to be in it. And I've definitely experienced that as a parent. And I think the trick is to figure out, and I think experiential education can be that for people who maybe don't see that path for themselves in their lives, but just to rediscover that wonder. Forest bathing, like what does it take to get you excited about being alive again? And sitting in that space for a little bit, staying there, and knowing that it's going to take some time to unlearn the other.
One other really important takeaway that I want to name of this conversation is one of the biggest feeders of climate anxiety that I see with people that I talk to, and this is also documented in a few studies, is we kind of go around assuming that other people don't care and that other people have selfish values. And there's this interesting study, I think, done in the UK and Turkey, or some combination of countries. I think it was the UK and Turkey, but I might be wrong. But basically, they polled a bunch of youth and asked, do you think people around you have more self-interest values or more compassionate values? And most people, I think it was like 89% of people or something, or most of the youth responded that they think other people have selfish values, but like a large percent, I think it's 89%, some large percentage of the respondents responded that they care about they care about others, they care about the earth. I think it was like 96% of people surveyed said that they want to do good for others, and like 89% said they want to do good for the planet. But like almost 50% of the youth actually thought that other people don't care. And I think like this conversation reinforces my own. I think I need to feed that part of myself that reminds myself that other people do care, because the climate anxiety is so real when you're like, back to what I was saying, people would email me, hey, I've been vegetarian for 6 years, I've been car free, child free, all the things, but they still feel so scared and alone and anxious. And there is something so powerful in remembering that it is a truth that so many people care more than you think they do. And I think this concept is called the values perception gap. And it blew my mind because I was realizing I'm going around thinking that nobody else is caring, and I'm in my bubble, but my bubble isn't that good because it's like a bubble of like protecting myself. And the biggest changes that I've seen in my own life and in my own surroundings over the past few years since I started Soapbox have actually not been, hey, like, did you know, like, factory farm beef is bad for the planet? And it's actually been changes where I don't expect. I'm not even trying to influence someone. So because of myself being vegetarian, the past few gatherings of our friends have just been all vegetarian food, but I didn't ask for it. I didn't tell anyone they had to do it. It's like those behavior changes where you realize like you might actually like it or it's easier to cook. And then over the summer, we all got many of us got bikes because my partner and I had bicycles, and like other people were seeing the amount of fun that we were having. And so we started doing so many activities that were not dependent on fossil fuels and really had nothing to do with, oh, did you know X, Y, and Z is bad for the planet? And I think like one connection that my friends and I made is a lot of the reason that summer 2023 was so good is because it was a summer of feeling like we were kids again. You know, when you were young and you could ride your bike around the block and like go to your friends' houses and do nothing. And like we're talking about forest bathing and just going out into the world with your kid or like a kid. And that is such a theme that I've seen true in my own life. Like we're all out here, adults with real jobs and stuff. But the reason we have found so many things that have stayed habits in our lives that aren't because it's like, oh, you should do this, or if you don't do this, you're a bad person. But really, it's just fun. And it's fun in the way that you don't really need much. And it's fun in the way that like you can see the awe and wonder in the world. And I think, I mean, I think that's like such a great theme that's and like a reminder that's come out of today is reconnecting with those feelings and like making sure people know that those feelings are available to them, and you don't need money, you don't need all of these resources. Like maybe you just need a community who cares about you, and you need some reminders that you can connect with those feelings. So there's just like so much change that is happening for the good of our planet, for the good of each other. And I think we need to train our brains to tune in to when those happen in ways that can surprise us.
Yes, yes.
I really feel like you all have given me the ultimate dream as a moderator, where you ask one question and then you get to sit back and just bask in this insight and this inspiration. And I'm really regretting now not just being like, hey, Elizabeth, why don't you just moderate this discussion? I feel so lucky to be here learning from you all and just feeling connected and grounded in a way. But I haven't for a little bit. So thank you to each of you. Before I ask you, unfortunately, since time is coming to a close soon, before I ask you if you have anything you'd like to plug, I just want to give one more opportunity. If there's anything top of mind that you just want to make sure you mention before we close out for this session.
I guess I kind of wanted to just tag on to Nivi when she was saying to notice what's going on good. As humans, we have always wanted and do respond to need. It's just that it used to be, my child is sick, I help my child. The neighbor is not well, I mow their lawn. It used to be very direct and very satisfying to meet the needs of other people. As media has expanded, we see the need and we can't meet it. And that can internally just feel so difficult because we are meant to be helpful beings to each other. And I guess I just try and remember that we are made to be helpful. We do respond. If a woman fell in front of me, everyone would jump to help her up. I mean, that is how we are made to respond. It can just be very feeling of conflict inside when we can't do it immediately. So to just acknowledge that in your own head, that feeling that you might be experiencing is because you are a good human that wants to respond. And so I think that is a good thing just to remember.
I'd love if anybody has anything you'd like to plug, anything you want to shout out, that you want people to know about. I'd love to give you a chance to do that.
Yay, thank you. Obviously, I want to invite everybody to come forest bathing. Just like it's all about letting you know that that's an option for you. Like, we're probably your type of people. So Cascadia Forest Therapy, we have sessions that we offer all over Seattle. We serve basically the area from like Bellingham to Olympia. And so we have a public walk calendar, and we have some things like sliding scale walks coming up through the end of the year, a bunch of different locations, a variety of guides. And I just, like, from the bottom of my heart, really say, like, I hope we see you in the woods. And if you've been inspired at all, there's forest therapy guides all over the world. Google forest bathing, name of city, there is somebody there. And if there's not, you email me and I'll find you somebody. But it's a way to just, when you find that person, you will find people. And we're everywhere. So obviously I want you to come to a session with me. I want you to come to a session with Denise. But I also want you to find someone close to you and start to build that community that makes the most sense to feed the joy in the midst of all of this. And I want that for us so badly. So you're officially invited.
I'll just put in a plug also for finding your neighborhood park restoration gnome. There are so many folks that are live near the green spaces that are close to them and spend time working on the land, I think, as a way of forest bathing, just being out there and being in the dirt and being within, having the great honor of watching it grow and evolve over time and feeling that deep sense of connection and place. And just putting in a plug, like the next time you walk through the forest and see people digging and planting and hauling, don't feel bad for not doing that with them. Just say hello. And one small step. And food goes a long way. A thank you goes a long way. And you never know where it may lead you.
I can share a little bit. I love meeting people, and this has been such an honor to be on this panel, and I'm so grateful, and I'm so excited to figure out when I can go forest bathing. Like I've heard about it from friends before, but I don't think I got it when they were talking about it, but now I'm like, yeah, I need to go. So I'm gonna just replug forest bathing, I guess. And so, as I mentioned throughout this conversation, Soapbox Project, the organization I run, helps you if you're overwhelmed by climate change and climate anxiety and you want to take action with other people. So the best way that many people start out is by signing up for our bite-sized action plans on our website, soapboxproject.org. There's like a million different spaces where you can sign up. And that is basically my way to gently handhold you. I'll tell you the topic, I'll tell you what to do, what the resources are. All you have to do is decide that you're committed and you are going to do the actions, that you're going to bring friends and family along, and you're going to take care of yourself. So that's like the best way for anyone around the world to get involved. All you need is an internet connection and some commitment and skin in the game. And the other thing too, if you are in Seattle, we're piloting spaces to do this kind of work in person. So as I said earlier, like we need better social spaces that give people purpose and connection and like connection with building a better world. So later in the year, and if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll hear about this. But if you are in Seattle and you want to stay in touch with me and learn more about them, definitely check out Soapbox Project, sign up for our newsletter, and like I would love to see you at the in-person space when we do our pop-ups. So I'm just so excited about building these kinds of coalitions and connections and people that are doing emotional work and physical work and advocacy work and all of the work for a better planet. So this has been so exciting.
We are really lucky at the Global Learning Summit that Cascadia Forest Therapy partnered with us, not only by giving us 2 incredible panelists, but also by providing a series of groundings, some meditations, some ways for you to center yourself as you're thinking about this work. So as we come to a close of this panel, we're going to move on to our slide with some reflection questions and actions that you can be thinking about. And from there, we will transition right into our very first grounding of the Global Learning Summit. And if you tune in tomorrow and Thursday, you'll get an opportunity to see a brand new one. Thank you to the 4 of you for everything. I'm holding so much gratitude in my heart right now for the ways that you have contributed and made me feel better. So thank you.